Mother Bear, don't let the human baby sleep alone when parents find out they were in shock. Let us know where you're watching from. If you love my content, consider supporting it with a super thanks. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe. It'll help us to remain in touch with amazing people like you. Grace and Noah Parker had always dreamed of raising their daughter Lily away from the noise and pollution of city life. When they finally saved enough to buy a small wooden cabin at the edge of Pine Hollow Forest, it seemed like their prayers had been answered. The cabin was modest. Weathered pine walls, a small porch with a rocking chair, and windows that let in streams of golden sunlight during the day. At night, those same windows offered views of stars that seemed close enough to touch. "It's perfect," Grace had whispered the day they moved in, cradling 3-month-old Lily against her chest. "She'll grow up with fresh air in her lungs and adventure in her heart." Noah squeezed his wife's shoulder. "And enough quiet to actually sleep through the night," he added with a tired smile. But Lily didn't sleep through the night. Not that first night, not the second, and not on the cold autumn evening 3 weeks after they'd settled in. Her cries pierced the stillness of their new home like clockwork. Midnight, 2 and 4 in the morning. Grace and Noah took turns, bleary-eyed and stumbling through the darkness to comfort their daughter. "Maybe she misses the city sounds," Noah suggested one evening, bouncing Lily gently as she fussed against his shoulder. All those car horns and sirens might have been like a lullaby to her. Grace shook her head. "I think she's just adjusting. New place, new smells." She reached for Lily, whose tiny face was scrunched up in discontent. "It's a big change for all of us." What the Parkers didn't know, couldn't know, was that they weren't the only ones listening to Lily's midnight cries. That night, as a half-moon hung low over the treetops, a massive shape moved slowly through the underbrush. A female black bear, her dark coat almost invisible in the shadows, paused at the edge of the forest. Her powerful head raised, nostrils flaring as she caught an unfamiliar scent on the breeze. The bear had roamed these woods for nearly a decade, knew every stream and berry patch within miles. But the cabin had only recently become occupied, and something about it drew her closer than caution should allow. Inside, Lily began to cry. The bear's ears twitched. She rose onto her hind legs, towering nearly 6 feet tall, and turned her gaze toward the sound. There was something in that cry, something that touched a primal chord deep within her. Without hesitation, the bear dropped back to all fours and padded silently across the clearing toward the cabin. Noah had just fallen into a deep sleep when Lily's wails startled him awake. He groaned, reaching automatically for Grace, but her side of the bed was empty. She must have heard Lily first. He rolled over, planning to go back to sleep, when a sound stopped him cold, a low, rumbling growl from somewhere outside. His eyes snapped open. That wasn't the wind, that wasn't a dream. That was something large, and it was close to their home. "Grace?" he called, sitting up. "Did you hear that?" No answer came from Lily's room, just the continued desperate cries of their daughter. Noah swung his legs over the side of the bed, heart pounding. That's when he heard it, a heavy thud against the side of the cabin, followed by the distinctive sound of claws scratching against wood. "Grace!" he shouted, fumbling for the flashlight on his nightstand. His hand closed around it just as his wife appeared in the doorway, Lily clutched to her chest. "There's something outside," Grace whispered, her face pale in the beam of the flashlight. "Something big. It's right by Lily's window." Noah swallowed hard. "Stay here," he said, reaching for the baseball bat he'd stored under the bed. "Lock the bedroom door behind me." "Noah, don't," Grace began, but Lily's cries grew louder, more insistent. drowning out her mother's protest. And outside, the scratching stopped, replaced by something even more unsettling, a soft, almost gentle whine that rose and fell in rhythm with Lily's cries, as if whatever creature lurked in the darkness was responding to their daughter's distress. Neither Grace nor Noah moved. They stood frozen, caught between fear and confusion, as the strange duet continued. Lily's human wails matched by an animal's answering calls. "What in the world?" Noah whispered. The scratching resumed, more determined now, and beneath the scratch of claws a pattern emerged. 3 gentle scrapes, a pause, then 3 more. Not random, not aggressive, almost like knocking. Something was trying to get in. Morning arrived with cruel brightness, casting sharp beams of sunlight through the cabin windows. Noah hadn't slept since the encounter. He'd spent hours pressed against the bedroom door, bat clutched in white-knuckled hands, listening to the strange sounds outside. Grace had eventually managed to soothe Lily back to sleep, but the 3 of them remained barricaded in the main bedroom until the scratching and whining finally stopped just before dawn. Maybe it was just curious, Grace suggested as she prepared breakfast, dark circles under her eyes. Animals sometimes investigate new things in their territory. Noah stared into his coffee cup. Animals don't knock, Grace, and they don't respond to a baby's cries like that. He pushed away from the table and moved to the window. I'm going to check outside, see if whatever it was left any signs. The morning air was crisp, tinged with pine and the earthy scent of autumn. Noah circled the cabin slowly, eyes scanning the ground. He didn't have to look hard. The evidence was unmistakable. Massive paw prints pressed into the soft soil beneath Lily's window. Claw marks scored the wooden siding, concentrated on the wall of the nursery. Noah crouched down, placing his hand beside one print. His palm looked childishly small in comparison. "Bear," he breathed, a cold knot forming in his stomach. "A big one." He was about to return inside when something caught his eye. A small tuft of dark fur caught on a splinter of wood. He plucked it free, rubbing the coarse hair between his fingers. This wasn't just any passing animal. This was a black bear, and it had been fixated on the room where their baby slept. "We need to call the ranger station," Noah announced as he stepped back inside. "There's a bear out there, and it was trying to get to Lily." Grace's face drained of color. "A bear? Are you sure?" Noah held up the tuft of fur. "Positive. And we can't stay here tonight unless something changes. It's not safe." The ranger arrived shortly after noon. A weathered woman named Ranger Collins, with steel-gray hair, pulled back in a tight ponytail, and eyes that had seen too much to be easily surprised. She examined the prints and scratches with professional detachment. "Female black bear," she confirmed, straightening up with a grunt. "Probably around 7 or 8 years old, judging by the size of the prints." "Is she dangerous?" Grace asked, holding Lily closer. Ranger Collins pursed her lips. "All bears are potentially dangerous, ma'am. But this behavior is unusual." She gestured toward the scratches. "See how these marks are concentrated around the window? And you say she was responding to your baby's cries?" Noah nodded. "It was the strangest thing. Almost like she was trying to, comfort her or something." The ranger's eyes narrowed. "There's a story in these parts. Old Mateo, one of our wildlife trackers, swears he once saw a mother bear adopt an orphaned fox kit. Carried it around on her back for nearly a month before it was big enough to fend for itself." She shook her head. "I always thought he was spinning tales, but..." "But what?" Grace pressed. "Bears are intelligent creatures, with strong maternal instincts. This one might have heard your baby and somehow connected with those sounds. The ranger looked uncomfortable with her own theory. Or it could just be curious about the new cabin occupants. Either way, I'll set up some deterrents. By sunset, the cabin was surrounded by motion-activated lights and noisemakers, standard equipment to keep bears at a distance. The ranger had also left them with bear spray and a marine air horn for emergencies. Use the horn if she comes back, she'd instructed. The noise should scare her off. If that fails and she tries to enter the cabin, that's when you use the spray, but only as a last resort. Night fell, bringing with it a gentle rain that pattered against the roof. The soft rhythmic sound lulled Lily to sleep earlier than usual, a small mercy for her exhausted parents. Noah and Grace settled into the living room, too wound up to sleep despite their fatigue. Maybe the ranger's equipment will keep her away, Grace said hopefully, pulling a blanket around her shoulders. Noah nodded, but his eyes kept drifting to the windows, searching the darkness beyond. Maybe. The hours ticked by in relative peace. Then, just after midnight, Lily's cries erupted from the nursery. Before either parent could reach her, the motion lights outside blazed to life, illuminating the yard in harsh white light. And there she was, a massive black bear standing at the edge of the forest, her eyes reflecting the sudden brightness. The noisemakers activated, sending shrill beeps into the night, but the bear didn't flee. Instead, she lowered her massive head and began to move toward the cabin with deliberate steps, ignoring the lights and sounds designed to frighten her away. "Noah," Grace whispered, frozen in the hallway. "She's coming." Lily's cries grew more intense, as if she sensed the commotion outside. The bear quickened her pace, heading straight for the nursery window. Noah grabbed the air horn from the kitchen counter and threw open the front door. The rain had intensified, soaking him instantly as he stepped onto the porch. He raised the horn and pressed the button, releasing a blast that seemed to shake the very trees. The bear stopped, turned her massive head toward Noah. For a heart-stopping moment, man and beast stared at each other through the curtain of rain, neither moving. Then slowly, the bear rose onto her hind legs, towering nearly 7 feet tall. Water streamed down her dark fur as she let out a deep, rumbling sound. Not quite a growl, not quite a moan. Behind Noah, Lily's cries suddenly stopped. The bear's head swiveled toward the nursery window, ears twitching. She dropped back to all fours and, to Noah's astonishment, circled around him, giving the porch a wide berth as she made her way toward Lily's window. "Grace," Noah called, his voice tight with fear. "Get Lily away from the window, now!" Inside, Grace snatched their daughter from her crib and retreated to the main bedroom, her heart hammering against her ribs. Through the nursery window, she caught a glimpse of the bear's massive shape as it approached, then disappeared from view. Noah backed slowly into the cabin, never taking his eyes off the bear. He closed and locked the door, then hurried to join Grace and Lily. "She ignored everything," he said, his voice shaking. "The lights, the noisemakers, even the air horn. It's like she's drawn to Lily specifically." Outside, the scratching began again. 3 gentle scrapes, a pause, then 3 more. Knocking, calling, waiting to be let in. Dawn broke with the promise of clearer skies. The rain had stopped sometime in the early morning hours, leaving the forest around the cabin sparkling with droplets that clung to every surface. Noah, who had dozed off in an armchair positioned to watch both the bedroom door and the windows, jerked awake at the sound of birdsong. For a moment he was disoriented. Then the memories of the night before came flooding back. The bear, the rain, the strange, deliberate knocking at Lily's window. He stood, wincing at the stiffness in his neck, and moved cautiously to peek through the curtains. The yard was empty. No massive shadow lurked by the tree line, no dark shape huddled beneath Lily's window. Just wet grass glistening in the morning light. He released a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "Grace," he called softly. "I think she's gone." Grace appeared in the hallway, Lily balanced on her hip. The baby was unusually quiet, her wide eyes taking in the room with a solemn expression that seemed too old for her tiny face. "Are you sure?" Grace asked, her free hand absently stroking Lily's back. Noah nodded, though uncertainty lingered in his eyes, for now at least. He ran a hand through his disheveled hair. "We need to decide what to do. We can't keep living like this." They spent the morning in tense discussion. Noah wanted to stay with friends in town until the bear situation was resolved. Grace, surprisingly, was hesitant to leave. "It doesn't feel like she wants to hurt Lily," she insisted, watching their daughter play on a blanket spread across the living room floor. "If anything, she seems protective." Noah stared at his wife in disbelief. "Grace, it's a wild bear. It doesn't matter what her intentions might be, she's dangerous. What if she decides the only way to protect Lily is to take her?" Grace flinched at the suggestion, but her expression remained stubborn. "That's not what this is about. I can feel it." "Then what is it about?" Noah demanded. "Because from where I'm standing, we have a wild predator fixated on our baby, and that's not something we can just ignore." Their argument was interrupted by the rumble of an approaching vehicle. Through the window, they spotted Ranger Collins's truck pulling up to the cabin, followed by a battered Jeep. "Back up," Noah said with visible relief. He hurried to the door to greet them. Ranger Collins stepped out of her truck, accompanied by an older man with leathery skin and a salt-and-pepper beard. He moved with the quiet confidence of someone who knew the forest as intimately as his own home. "Mr. Parker," the ranger said with a nod, "this is Mateo Redhawk. He's our senior wildlife tracker, and if anyone can make sense of your bear situation, it's him." Mateo's weathered face creased in a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Ranger Collins tells me you've got yourself an interesting visitor." Noah led them around the cabin, pointing out the fresh scratches and paw prints. Mateo crouched by the marks, his fingers tracing the impressions with a familiarity born of decades in the wild. "She's a big one," he murmured, "and she's coming back to the same spot night after night." He looked up at Noah, who nodded. "That's purposeful behavior. Bears don't fixate unless they have a reason." "Like what?" Grace asked, joining them with Lily in her arms. Mateo's gaze shifted to the baby, his expression softening. "May I?" he asked, extending his hands. Grace hesitated, then carefully passed Lily to the older man. Mateo held her with surprising gentleness, studying her face with intense concentration. "Has she been sick recently?" he asked. "Any unusual crying patterns before the bear started appearing?" Noah and Grace exchanged puzzled looks. "She's had some difficulty sleeping since we moved here," Grace offered. "More crying at night than usual." Mateo nodded, as if this confirmed something. "Bears have an extraordinary sense of smell," he said, handing Lily back to Grace. "And they can detect things we can't: illness, fear, distress. It's possible your daughter's crying triggered something in this bear, a maternal response." "But why would a bear care about a human baby?" Noah asked, frustration edging his voice. Mateo's eyes took on a distant look. "Nature isn't as simple as we like to pretend, Mr. Parker. There are connections we don't understand." He turned to Ranger Collins. "Denise, do you remember the spring floods 5 years back, the ones that washed out the North Ridge?" The ranger nodded slowly. 3 bear cubs drowned. We found them downstream. And their mother? Never found her. Assumed she was swept away too. Mateo shook his head. She survived. I tracked her for weeks afterward. She searched those riverbanks until her paws were raw, calling for her cubs. He looked back at the scratches on the cabin wall. I'd bet my last dollar this is the same bear. A heavy silence fell over the group, broken only by Lily's soft babbling. The implications of Mateo's story hung in the air like an unspoken question. "You're saying she lost her babies," Grace said, finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "And now she's trying to, what? Adopt ours?" "I'm saying grief changes creatures, same as it changes people," Mateo replied. "And sometimes that change leads to unexpected behaviors." Noah shook his head, struggling to process the implications. "So, what do we do? We can't exactly share custody of our daughter with a bear." "No," Ranger Collins agreed. "But we need to approach this carefully. If this bear has formed a fixation on your child, standard deterrence clearly won't work." She exchanged a meaningful look with Mateo. "We might need to consider relocation." "Relocation won't solve it," Mateo said quietly. "Not if she's bonded. She'll find her way back, no matter how far you take her." The tracker turned to Grace, his eyes serious. "Mrs. Parker, I'm going to suggest something unconventional, something that goes against standard wildlife management practices." Noah tensed, but Grace met the older man's gaze steadily. "What is it?" "Let her watch," Mateo said simply. "From a distance. Set up a safe space at the edge of your property where she can observe without getting too close. If she's seeking connection with your child, fighting against that instinct will only make her more determined, more desperate." "Are you out of your mind?" Noah exploded. "You want us to encourage a wild bear to hang around our baby?" Mateo remained calm in the face of Noah's anger. "What I'm suggesting is we work with her natural instincts rather than against them. Bears are intelligent creatures, Mr. Parker. They can learn boundaries if those boundaries make sense to them." Ranger Collins looked deeply uncomfortable. "Mateo, I can't officially endorse this approach. If anything happens, it's on me," the tracker replied. He turned back to the Parkers. 1 week. Give me 1 week to try this approach. If it doesn't work, we'll tranquilize her and move her so far away she'll never find her way back." Grace and Noah exchanged a long look, hers pleading, his incredulous. Finally, Noah threw up his hands in defeat. 1 week, he agreed, his voice tight. "But I want rifles on this property, and if that bear makes one move toward our daughter, all bets are off." Mateo nodded solemnly. "Fair enough." As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, Mateo worked with quiet efficiency at the edge of the property, about 50 yards from the cabin. He constructed what he called a viewing platform, essentially a reinforced wooden bench nestled among the trees, positioned with a clear sightline to Lily's window. "Bears are creatures of habit," he explained as he worked. "If we give her a designated spot to watch from, she's less likely to approach the cabin directly." Noah remained skeptical, but helped carry lumber and tools. By late afternoon, the platform was complete, and Mateo added one final touch, a small bundle of fabric tied to a nearby branch. "What's that?" Grace asked, watching from the porch with Lily. "One of your daughter's blankets," Mateo replied. "I need her scent to guide the bear to this spot." He caught Noah's alarmed expression and added, "Don't worry. Bears follow their noses. If she smells your daughter here, she'll come to investigate. When she finds this spot, with its clear view of the nursery, she'll likely adopt it as her own." As darkness began to fall, Mateo insisted on staying, setting up a small camp near the viewing platform. First night is crucial, he told them. I need to observe her reaction, make sure she understands the new arrangement. Noah and Grace retreated inside, the night's routine taking on an air of surreal tension. They bathed Lily, read her a story, and placed her in her crib as usual. But this time, they left the nursery curtains partially open. An invitation. A test. This is insane, Noah muttered, as they settled into the living room, lights dimmed so they could see outside. We're essentially offering our daughter as a bear exhibit. Grace took his hand. We're trying to find a peaceful solution, she corrected gently. For everyone's sake. Hours passed. Lily, surprisingly, slept more soundly than she had since they'd moved in. The forest remained quiet, the motion-activated lights dormant. Noah began to wonder if the bear had moved on, if the previous nights had been an aberration. Then, just after midnight, a shadow darker than the surrounding darkness emerged from the trees. The bear moved with surprising grace for such a massive creature, her head raised as she tested the air. The motion lights flickered on, bathing the yard in stark illumination. Noah tensed, reaching for the rifle Ranger Collins had left propped against the wall. But the bear didn't approach the cabin. Instead, her nose led her unerringly toward Mateo's platform. She circled it once, twice, sniffing intently at the blanket tied to the branch. From his position nearby, Mateo remained perfectly still, a shadow among shadows. The bear was aware of him. Her head swiveled briefly in his direction, but she seemed to accept his presence as non-threatening. Finally, the bear settled onto the platform, her massive body surprisingly nimble as she arranged herself with a clear view of Lily's window. She rested her head on her paws, eyes fixed on the faint glow from the nursery night light. Inside, Noah and Grace watched in stunned silence. The bear didn't growl or pace or scratch. She simply watched, like a sentinel keeping vigil through the night. Unbelievable, Noah whispered, his hand still resting on the rifle but no longer gripping it with white-knuckled tension. In her crib, Lily slept peacefully, unaware of the extraordinary drama unfolding outside her window. A drama in which she was the unknowing center. For 3 nights, the pattern held. The bear would emerge from the forest shortly after midnight, make her way to Mateo's platform, and settle in to watch over Lily's window. She never approached the cabin, never made any aggressive moves. She simply watched, her dark eyes reflecting the soft glow of the nursery nightlight. Mateo kept his vigil as well, observing from a respectful distance. Each morning, he would share his observations with the Parkers over coffee at their kitchen table. She's establishing a routine, he explained on the 4th morning, warming his hands around a steaming mug, and, more importantly, she's respecting the boundary we've set. Noah remained cautious, but his initial panic had subsided somewhat. So, what's the end game here? She just watches our daughter sleep for the rest of her life? Mateo smiled faintly. Nature finds its own balance, Mr. Parker. This won't go on forever. He sipped his coffee thoughtfully. Bears are seasonal creatures. Winter's coming and with it hibernation. She'll retreat to her den eventually. And next spring? Grace asked. Will she come back? Possibly, Mateo admitted. But by then your daughter will be older. Her cries will change. The connection might fade naturally. The tracker's words provided some comfort, but questions still nagged at Noah. That night, after Grace had gone to bed, he found himself sitting on the porch, staring out at the silent forest. A small sound made him turn. Mateo stood at the bottom of the porch steps, his weathered face half hidden in shadow. "Can't sleep?" the older man asked, his voice low. Noah shook his head. Too many questions. Mateo climbed the steps and settled into the second rocking chair. For a while, neither man spoke, the silence between them comfortable despite their differences. "You said you tracked her," Noah finally said. "After she lost her cubs, what was she like?" Mateo's eyes grew distant with memory. "Broken," he replied simply. The way she moved, the sounds she made, everything about her spoke of loss. Bears don't weep the way humans do, but they grieve just as deeply. "And you think she hears Lily crying and it, what? Reminds her of her cubs?" "I think it awakens something in her that she thought was dead," Mateo said. "Purpose, connection." He glanced at Noah. "You're a new father. Can you imagine losing your child? What that would do to you?" Noah's throat tightened at the thought. "I can't even bear to think about it." Now, imagine carrying that pain for years with no way to understand it, no words to express it. Mateo leaned back in his chair, the wood creaking beneath his weight. And then, one day, you hear a sound that pierces right through that fog of grief, a cry that calls to something deep inside you, something primal and protective. Noah was silent, absorbing the tracker's words. When he spoke again, his voice was hesitant. "Do you really believe animals feel things that deeply?" Mateo's smile was sad. "Mr. Parker, I've spent 68 years in these forests. I've seen eagles return to the same dead tree where their mates died, year after year, calling into empty air. I've watched wolves adopt orphaned pups from rival packs. I've seen an old bull elk stand guard over the body of his fallen companion for 3 days, refusing to leave even when predators circled." He shook his head slowly. "Anyone who says animals don't feel hasn't been paying attention." The conversation lingered in Noah's mind as he finally went to bed, slipping quietly beneath the covers beside Grace's sleeping form. He lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the tracker's stories spinning through his thoughts. Sometime after midnight, Lily began to cry. Not her usual midnight wail, but a softer, more distressed sound. Noah rose quickly, padding down the hall to her nursery. He lifted her from her crib, murmuring soothing nonsense as he checked her diaper and found it dry. "What's wrong, little one?" he whispered, bouncing her gently. "Bad dream?" Lily continued to fuss, her tiny face scrunched in discomfort. On impulse, Noah carried her to the window and pulled back the curtain slightly. The motion lights had activated, illuminating the yard and the edge of the forest beyond. The bear was there, as expected, sitting patiently on her platform. But something was different tonight. As Noah watched, the massive creature rose onto all fours, her attention fixed on the nursery window where Noah stood with Lily. For a breathless moment, father and bear regarded each other across the distance. Then, slowly, deliberately, the bear let out a soft, rumbling sound. A sound Noah had heard before, on that first rainy night. Not quite a growl, not quite a moan. Something in between, something almost soothing. To Noah's astonishment, Lily's cries began to subside. She hiccuped softly, then turned her head toward the window, as if drawn to the bear's call. Her small body relaxed against Noah's chest as the bear continued its gentle rumbling. "Impossible," Noah breathed, watching his daughter's eyes grow heavy. Within minutes, Lily was asleep again, her breathing deep and even. The bear settled back onto her platform, seemingly satisfied. Noah stood frozen by the window, cradling his sleeping daughter, his mind struggling to process what he'd just witnessed. It wasn't just that the bear responded to Lily's cries. Lily had responded to the bear as well, as if they understood each other on some level beyond human comprehension. He returned Lily to her crib with shaking hands, then made his way back to bed. Grace stirred as he slid beneath the covers. "Everything okay?" she murmured sleepily. Noah hesitated, unsure how to explain what he'd seen. "Yes," he said finally. "Everything's fine. Go back to sleep." But sleep eluded him for the rest of the night, his thoughts circling around the strange bond forming between his daughter and the creature in the woods. A bond he couldn't understand, but could no longer deny. Morning brought a heavy fog that shrouded the forest, turning familiar shapes into ghostly silhouettes. Noah moved through his morning routine in a daze, his mind still replaying the events of the night before. Mateo arrived as the fog was beginning to lift, his jeep crawling up the muddy driveway. He accepted a cup of coffee from Grace with a grateful nod, then turned to Noah. "Something happened last night," the tracker said. It wasn't a question. Noah nodded, not bothering to ask how Mateo knew. Lily was crying, the bear. She made this sound, and Lily responded to it. She stopped crying and went right back to sleep. Mateo didn't look surprised. "They're communicating," he said simply. "That's not possible," Noah protested, though his conviction had been badly shaken by what he'd witnessed. "Communication takes many forms, Mr. Parker." Mateo set down his coffee cup. "Some of them we understand, many we don't." Grace joined them at the table, Lily babbling happily in her arms. "So, what happens now?" she asked, looking between the two men. "Is this safe?" Mateo considered the question carefully. "I believe it is," he said finally. "The bear has shown no aggression, only concern. She's respecting the boundaries we've established." He smiled at Lily, who beamed back at him with innocent delight. "And your daughter seems to be thriving under her unusual guardian's watch." It was true, Noah realized with a jolt of surprise. Lily had been sleeping better since they'd allowed the bear to watch from a distance. Her fussy periods had decreased, and there was a new brightness in her eyes, as if she sensed that her world had expanded in some mysterious way. "I still don't understand it," Noah admitted. "Any of it." "Understanding isn't always necessary," Mateo replied. "Sometimes witnessing is enough." The day passed in relative normalcy, though Noah found himself glancing frequently toward the edge of the forest, half expecting to see the bear's dark shape among the trees. That night after dinner, as Grace was preparing Lily's bath, Noah stepped onto the porch alone. The evening was clear, stars beginning to emerge in the deepening blue of the sky. Noah took a deep breath, then walked with deliberate steps toward the viewing platform. He needed to see it for himself to understand what the bear saw when she looked toward his daughter's window. The platform was sturdy, built to hold the bear's substantial weight. Noah hesitated, then carefully settled himself onto it. From this vantage point, Lily's window was clearly visible, a perfect view into the nursery. He imagined the bear sitting in this exact spot night after night, watching over his daughter with those dark, intelligent eyes. A twig snapped in the forest behind him. Noah turned, his heart rate accelerating as a massive shadow detached itself from the deeper darkness of the trees. The bear emerged into the clearing, moving with her characteristic grace despite her size. Noah should have been terrified, should have run for the cabin, for the rifle, for safety. Instead, he remained perfectly still, watching as the bear registered his presence on her platform. She paused, head tilted slightly, nostrils flaring as she caught his scent. For a long, breathless moment, they regarded each other, man and bear, separated by species and experience, but connected by something Noah was only beginning to understand. Then, to his amazement, the bear lowered herself to the ground a respectful distance away, her posture non-threatening. She was waiting, Noah realized, waiting for him to leave so she could take her accustomed place. But there was no aggression in her, no impatience, just a watchful, intelligent presence. "You really do care about her, don't you?" Noah said softly, the words escaping before he could consider how absurd it was to speak to a wild bear. The bear's ears twitched at the sound of his voice. She made that distinctive rumbling sound again, the one that had soothed Lily the night before. Slowly, carefully, Noah stood. "I don't know if you understand me," he continued, his voice steady despite the pounding of his heart. "But she's my cub, mine and Grace's. We'll protect her with everything we have." He swallowed hard. "But I think you want to protect her too." The bear remained still, watching him with those fathomless eyes. "I can't explain why," Noah said, "but I believe you. I believe you mean her no harm." He stepped away from the platform, creating more space between them. "So we'll share this, for as long as it lasts." With those words, Noah backed away, maintaining eye contact until he reached the edge of the clearing. Only then did he turn and walk briskly back to the cabin, feeling the weight of the bear's gaze between his shoulder blades. Inside, Grace was just finishing Lily's bath, wrapping their daughter in a fluffy towel. "Where did you go?" she asked, noticing his flushed face. Noah hesitated, then decided on honesty. "I went to the viewing platform. I wanted to see what she sees." He ran a hand through his hair, unsure how to explain the rest. "Grace, she came while I was out there." Grace's eyes widened, her arms tightening instinctively around Lily. "What happened?" "Nothing," Noah said, the wonder of the encounter still evident in his voice. "She just waited, like she was giving me a chance to leave so she could take her spot." He shook his head, still processing the experience. "I spoke to her, told her Lily was our cub, but that I understood she wanted to protect her too." Grace studied her husband's face, searching for signs of fear or distress, but found only bewilderment and a strange sort of acceptance. "You're starting to believe, aren't you? In what Mateo said about her?" Noah sank into a kitchen chair, watching as Grace gently dried Lily's wispy hair. "I don't know what I believe anymore, but I know what I saw, and it wasn't a mindless predator. There's something more happening here." The next morning brought a visitor they weren't expecting. A glossy black SUV with government plates pulled up to the cabin just as Grace was setting breakfast on the table. Noah peered through the window, frowning. "Were we expecting someone from the wildlife department?" he asked, as a tall woman in a crisp uniform stepped out of the vehicle. Grace shook her head, balancing Lily on her hip as she moved to stand beside him. Ranger Collins didn't mention anyone else coming. The woman who approached their door carried herself with the confident authority of someone used to being in charge. Her dark hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and the gold badge pinned to her uniform gleamed in the morning sun. "Mr. and Mrs. Parker?" she asked when Noah opened the door. "I'm Director Elaine Hargrove with the State Wildlife Conservation Agency. I understand you've been experiencing some unusual bear activity on your property." Noah glanced past her, searching for any sign of Mateo or Ranger Collins. "Yes, but we've been working with the local ranger service to address it." Director Hargrove's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Yes, I'm aware of Ranger Collins's unorthodox approach. That's why I'm here." She glanced at Lily, her expression softening fractionally. "May I come in? There are some matters we need to discuss regarding your safety." Grace and Noah exchanged uneasy looks, but they stepped aside to let the director enter. Once seated at their kitchen table with a cup of coffee she barely touched, Director Hargrove got straight to the point. I've reviewed the reports from this situation and I have serious concerns about the current management plan. Her voice was clipped, professional. Allowing a wild bear to maintain proximity to a human infant goes against every established safety protocol we have. With all due respect, Director, Grace began, the approach seems to be working. The bear hasn't shown any aggression, and she's staying at a safe distance. Mrs. Parker, Hargrove cut in, black bears can run at speeds of 30 miles per hour and have been known to break into vehicles seeking food. The idea that this animal is somehow bonded to your child is not just scientifically unfounded, it's dangerous magical thinking. Noah felt a flash of irritation at the dismissive tone. Director Hargrove, have you actually observed this particular bear's behavior? I don't need to, she replied crisply. Bears are wild animals with predictable patterns. This one has clearly associated your home with a food source. She's not coming for food, Grace interrupted, her voice sharper than Noah had heard in a long time. She's never approached our trash or tried to enter our home. She comes to watch over Lily, that's it. Director Hargrove's expression hardened. I understand you've been working with Mateo Redhawk on this matter. The way she said the tracker's name carried unmistakable disdain. While Mr. Redhawk has certain folklore knowledge, he lacks scientific credentials. We can't base wildlife management decisions on mystical notions about animal behavior. The sound of tires on gravel announced another arrival. Through the window, Noah spotted Mateo's Jeep pulling up beside the director's SUV. Relief washed over him. That would be Mr. Redhawk now, he said, rising to open the door. Mateo entered with Ranger Collins close behind, both looking grim. The tracker's eyes immediately fell on Director Hargrove, and a shadow crossed his weathered features. Elaine, he said, his usual warm tone notably cooler. I should have expected you'd show up. Mr. Redhawk, she replied with a curt nod. I was just explaining to the Parkers that we'll be implementing standard protocols for this situation. A trapping team is on the way. Trapping team. Grace stood abruptly, clutching Lily closer. What does that mean exactly? Ranger Collins stepped forward, looking uncomfortable. The director has ordered that the bear be captured and relocated to the Northern Wilderness Preserve. It's about 200 miles from here. Or euthanized if deemed too habituated to humans, Director Hargrove added matter-of-factly. We'll make that determination once she's sedated and evaluated. Euthanized? Noah's voice rose in disbelief. You can't be serious. This bear hasn't shown any aggression whatsoever. The fact that it returns repeatedly to a human dwelling is concerning enough, Hargrove countered. This isn't a fairy tale, Mr. Parker. That animal isn't a nanny for your child. It's a wild predator with unpredictable behavior. Mateo had remained silent, watching the exchange with hooded eyes. Now he stepped forward, his voice low but intense. Elaine, you're making a mistake. This situation is unique. The bear has established a pattern that's causing no harm. Disrupting that pattern could lead to exactly the kind of unpredictable behavior you're worried about. Director Hargrove's jaw tightened. The decision has been made, Mateo. The trapping team will arrive this afternoon. She turned to the Parkers. I suggest you keep your daughter inside and away from windows until the operation is complete. Noah felt a growing sense of dread. He looked to Mateo, hoping the tracker had some solution. Some way to prevent what suddenly felt like an impending tragedy. Mateo met his gaze, then turned to Director Hargrove. At least wait until tonight. Let me show you her behavior firsthand. If you still want to relocate her after seeing how she interacts, I won't stand in your way. For a moment, it seemed the director would refuse. Then, surprisingly, she nodded. Fine. One night of observation, but the trapping equipment will be set up and ready to deploy at first light. After Director Hargrove left to make arrangements with her team, the cabin felt eerily quiet. Lily babbled softly in her playpen, oblivious to the tension surrounding her. Can she really just come in and make these decisions? Grace asked Ranger Collins, her voice tight with suppressed emotion. The ranger sighed heavily. She's the state director. She has jurisdiction over wildlife management decisions across the entire region. She glanced apologetically at Mateo. I tried to explain the situation, but Elaine Hargrove has never been interested in explanations that don't fit her textbooks, Mateo finished. He turned to Noah and Grace. We have until tonight. If we're going to change her mind, we need to show her what I've seen, what you've seen. And if we can't change her mind? Noah asked quietly. Mateo's eyes darkened. Then the bear will be gone by tomorrow, and I doubt she'll fare well in relocation. The day passed in a haze of anxiety. Noah found himself repeatedly drawn to the window, staring out at the platform where the bear had sat night after night, watching over his daughter. The thought of that patient, gentle presence being forcibly removed, or worse, destroyed, created a hollow feeling in his chest he couldn't explain. Grace was even more affected. She moved through her daily routines mechanically, holding Lily closer than usual, her eyes distant and troubled. It's strange, she said softly as they prepared dinner. A month ago, I would have been terrified knowing there was a bear watching our baby. Now, I'm terrified they're going to take her away. Noah slipped an arm around his wife's waist. I know. It doesn't make any sense, but I feel the same way. By nightfall, the cabin was surrounded by wildlife officials. Director Hargrove had returned with a team of 4 agents, all carrying tranquilizer rifles and capture equipment. They spoke in low, professional voices as they established positions around the property. Mateo stationed himself on the porch, watching their preparations with barely concealed disapproval. When Noah joined him, the tracker's expression was grim. They've already decided, he said quietly. This is just a formality to her. Then why bother waiting until morning? Noah asked. Bears are harder to track at night. They want to make a clean capture in daylight. Mateo's gaze drifted to the forest's edge. She'll come tonight, same as always. But tomorrow. He left the sentence unfinished. Inside, Grace was putting Lily to bed with an unusual degree of ceremony. She read 3 stories instead of the usual one, sang every lullaby she knew, and lingered by the crib long after their daughter had fallen asleep. Should we close the curtains? She asked Noah when he came to check on them. The director said to keep Lily away from windows. Noah looked at the partially open curtains, then at his sleeping daughter's peaceful face. No, he said firmly. Let's keep everything normal, for both of them. At midnight, the cabin and surrounding woods were unnaturally quiet. The wildlife team had set up floodlights around the perimeter, their harsh beams cutting through the darkness, creating sharp shadows where there should have been gentle moonlight. Director Hargrove stood on the porch with Ranger Collins, both women scanning the tree line with night vision binoculars. She may not come with all this disruption, Ranger Collins warned. If she's truly fixated on the child, she'll come. Hargrove replied confidently. And when she does, you'll see this is just a case of a bear that's lost its natural fear of humans. Noah and Grace watched from inside, tension building as the minutes ticked by. 1 o'clock came and went, then 1:30. No sign of the bear. Maybe she senses the trap, Grace whispered, disappointment and relief warring in her voice. Then, suddenly, Lily began to cry. Not her usual fussy night waking, but a sharp, distressed wail that had both parents rushing to the nursery. Noah reached her first, lifting her from the crib with practiced hands. "Shh, it's okay, sweetheart," he murmured, checking her diaper and finding it dry. "Did you have a bad dream?" Lily continued to cry, her little face red with the effort, tiny fists clenched at her sides. Nothing Noah did seemed to console her. Grace tried next, offering a bottle, a pacifier, gentle bouncing, all to no avail. "Something's really bothering her," Grace said worriedly. Outside, the wildlife team had tensed at the sound of Lily's cries, all eyes fixed on the forest edge. Director Hargrove raised her hand, signaling her team to be ready. And then, just as she had predicted, the bear emerged from the trees. Even at a distance, Noah could see something was different tonight. The bear moved with purpose, her massive head swinging from side to side as if scanning for threats. She ignored the viewing platform entirely, moving directly toward the cabin with determined strides. "She's approaching the structure," Director Hargrove said into her radio, her voice tight with vindication. "Prepare to deploy deterrence." Ranger Collins grabbed her arm. "Wait, Elaine, let's see what she does. She's never approached the cabin this directly before." In the nursery, Lily's cries reached a fever pitch. Grace rocked her desperately, her own eyes filling with tears of helplessness. "I don't know what's wrong with her, Noah. She won't stop." Noah moved to the window, pulled back the curtain completely, and watched as the bear covered the distance to the cabin with surprising speed. The floodlights caught her massive form, turning her into a creature of stark contrasts. Gleaming eyes, glistening teeth, powerful muscles moving beneath dark fur. "Director," one of the wildlife agents called. "She's not responding to the lights. Permission to deploy noise deterrence." "Hold," Director Hargrove ordered, her confidence wavering slightly as she watched the bear's determined approach. This wasn't typical bear behavior. Even she could see that. The bear stopped about 20 feet from the cabin, directly in front of Lily's window. She rose onto her hind legs, towering nearly 7 feet tall, her front paws pawing at the air, as if trying to reach something beyond her grasp. And then she made that sound, that distinctive rumbling call that Noah had heard before. But this time it was louder, more insistent, almost desperate. In Grace's arms, Lily suddenly stopped crying. Her tear-streaked face turned toward the window, toward the bear, with such deliberate focus that Noah felt a chill run down his spine. "Grace," he whispered, "bring her closer to the window." "What? Noah, no." "Trust me," he insisted, moving to open the window a few inches, just enough to let the night air in. "Please." With visible reluctance, Grace stepped closer to the window, holding Lily so she could see out. The baby's eyes widened. Her crying completely stopped now, replaced by an intense focus on the bear still standing tall outside. To everyone's astonishment, Lily made a soft cooing sound, then broke into a delighted giggle, reaching her tiny hands toward the window. The bear responded immediately, dropping back to all fours and moving closer, stopping just beneath the window. She made the rumbling sound again, gentler now, almost like a purr. "What in God's name?" Director Hargrove breathed, watching the exchange with undisguised shock. Mateo had quietly moved to stand beside her. "They're communicating," he said simply, echoing what he'd told Noah days earlier. "Just as I said they would." On the porch, Ranger Collins lowered her binoculars, her face a mask of wonder. "I've never seen anything like this in 20 years of wildlife service." For nearly 10 minutes the bizarre tableau held, the bear maintaining her position below the window, occasionally making her distinctive rumbling call, Lily responding with delighted baby sounds, completely calm now, her earlier distress forgotten. Finally, as if satisfied that all was well, the bear dropped back to all fours and began a slow, deliberate retreat. She paused at the viewing platform, settling onto it with her customary grace, her eyes never leaving Lily's window. Director Hargrove stood frozen, her plans for a clean capture in the morning suddenly complicated by what she'd witnessed. This isn't normal behavior," she said weakly. "No," Matteo agreed. "It isn't normal, it's extraordinary." He turned to face her directly. "Still want to relocate her, Elaine? Or worse?" The director's professional mask slipped, revealing genuine uncertainty. I need to consult with some colleagues about this." Inside, Grace placed a now calm and sleepy Lily back in her crib. The baby yawned enormously. Her earlier distress completely vanished and quickly drifted back to sleep. "I don't understand what happened," Grace whispered, but it was like she knew. Like she knew Lily was upset, and she came to check on her. Noah nodded, his own thoughts racing as he tried to process the night's events. And Lily recognized her too. She wasn't afraid at all. They returned to the living room to find Director Hargrove standing awkwardly by their door, her earlier confidence notably diminished. "Mr. and Mrs. Parker," she began, her voice more tentative than it had been earlier that day. "I've spoken with my team, and we've decided to postpone the relocation operation pending further observation." Noah felt a wave of relief wash over him. "Thank you, Director." "Don't thank me yet," she warned, some of her professional demeanor returning. "This is highly irregular, and I'm not making any promises about the final outcome. But what I witnessed tonight requires further study." After the director and her team had departed, promising to return the next day for additional observation, Matteo lingered on the porch. His weathered face looked tired, but satisfied in the fading floodlights. "You knew she would come directly to the cabin tonight, didn't you?" Noah asked, joining him. The tracker nodded slowly. "I suspected she might. The disruption, the unfamiliar people, the lights. I think she sensed something was wrong." He glanced toward Lily's window. "And perhaps she wanted to make sure her charge was safe." "Do you really believe she can sense when Lily is distressed?" Grace asked, wrapping her arms around herself against the night chill. "Animals perceive the world differently than we do," Matteo replied. "They notice patterns we miss, sense emotions we try to hide, hear sounds beyond our range." He smiled faintly. "Is it so hard to believe that a creature with a mother's instinct might recognize a baby's distress call?" As if on cue, a soft rumble carried from the viewing platform. The bear was still there, still watching, standing guard. "Get some sleep," Matteo advised, heading toward his jeep. "Tomorrow will bring its own challenges. Elaine Hargrove doesn't change her mind easily, but at least now she's seen what we've seen. That's a start." Noah awoke the next morning to an unusual sound. Laughter. Grace's laughter, bright and unrestrained, coming from the kitchen. He rolled out of bed, pulled on a t-shirt, and padded down the hallway, curious. He found his wife by the kitchen window, Lily balanced on her hip, both of them looking outside with undisguised delight. Grace turned as he entered, her face alight with wonder. "Noah, look," she whispered, gesturing toward the window. He moved to stand beside them, and what he saw made him blink in surprise. The bear was still there, not on her platform, but in the yard, about 30 feet from the house. She was sitting on her haunches, massive head tilted upward, watching as a squirrel darted along a branch overhead. The squirrel chattered angrily, throwing acorn shells down at the bear in obvious irritation. One bounced off the bear's nose, causing her to sneeze explosively. The sudden sound sent the squirrel scurrying higher, its bushy tail flicking in alarm. It was such an ordinary moment, a large predator momentarily distracted by a tiny woodland creature, yet it humanized the bear in a way Noah hadn't expected. He found himself smiling as the bear batted half-heartedly at another falling acorn shell. "She stayed all night," Grace said softly. Ranger Collins called earlier, said the bear never left her post, not even to forage. Noah felt a pang of something close to guilt. She must be hungry. As if making a decision, the bear rose and lumbered toward the forest edge. But instead of disappearing into the trees, she settled herself in a patch of sunlight just at the boundary between woods and clearing. Close enough to keep the cabin in sight, but far enough to be partially concealed by the first line of pines. "Director Hargrove is coming back around 10, Grace continued, bouncing Lily gently. "With some wildlife biologist from the university. Mateo thinks that's a good sign, that she's actually taking this seriously now." Noah nodded, his eyes still on the bear's distant form. "What do you think will happen?" Grace's expression sobered. "I don't know, but I think Lily needs her. Somehow." She looked down at their daughter, who was contentedly gumming her own fist. "And I think she needs Lily too." The words hung in the air between them, a truth neither had been willing to fully articulate until now. Whatever bond had formed between their daughter and the wild creature outside, it wasn't one-sided. Something mutual and mysterious had developed. Something that defied rational explanation but couldn't be denied. Director Hargrove arrived precisely at 10, accompanied by a rumpled-looking man with wire-rimmed glasses and an air of distracted intelligence. He introduced himself as Dr. Alan Mercer, wildlife behaviorist from the State University. "Fascinating situation you have here," he said, peering owlishly at Noah and Grace. "Truly unprecedented in the literature. Director Hargrove has briefed me on the basics, but I'd like to hear your observations firsthand." Over coffee, Noah and Grace recounted everything they'd witnessed since the bear first appeared. Dr. Mercer listened intently, occasionally scribbling notes in a dog-eared notebook, asking clarifying questions about the bear's vocalizations and body language. "And you say this started shortly after you moved in?" he asked, adjusting his glasses. "Was there anything unusual about your arrival? Any encounters with wildlife during the move-in process?" Noah and Grace exchanged glances, trying to recall. "Not really," Grace said slowly. "It was all pretty straightforward. The moving truck came, we unpacked, settled in." "Lily was fussy those first few days," Noah added. "The change in routine, probably." Dr. Mercer nodded thoughtfully. "And where exactly is the bear now?" "At the forest edge," Noah replied, pointing through the window. "She moved there this morning." The wildlife biologist moved to look out, spotting the dark shape still lounging in the dappled sunlight. "Extraordinary," he murmured. "She's maintaining a visual connection, but giving you space." He turned back to them, his expression thoughtful. "May I see the baby?" Grace led him to the living room, where Lily was playing on her activity mat, batting at colorful hanging toys. Dr. Mercer crouched nearby, observing her with the same careful attention he might give to a wild animal. "She seems very well adjusted," he commented. "No signs of distress or anxiety." "She's been sleeping better since we allowed the bear to keep watch," Grace said. "More settled overall." Dr. Mercer made another note, then straightened up with a slight grunt. "I'd like to set up some monitoring equipment if you don't mind. Nothing intrusive, just some cameras to record interactions and perhaps some audio equipment to capture the vocalizations more clearly." Director Hargrove, who had been uncharacteristically quiet throughout the interview, finally spoke up. Dr. Mercer believes that we may be witnessing a rare behavioral phenomenon. He's convinced me to delay any relocation plans until he's had a chance to properly document the situation. The relief that flooded through Noah was so intense it left him momentarily speechless. Grace reached out and squeezed his hand, her own feelings evident in the pressure of her fingers. "Thank you," she said simply. "We just want what's best for everyone involved, Lily and the bear." Director Hargrove's expression remained professionally neutral, but something in her eyes had softened since the previous night. "This doesn't mean we're abandoning safety protocols," she warned. "Dr. Mercer's team will maintain a presence here, and at the first sign of any aggressive behavior, we'll intervene immediately." "Of course," Noah agreed quickly. "We understand." Over the next week, the Parker cabin became a hub of quiet scientific activity. Dr. Mercer and his graduate students installed cameras at strategic points around the property, set up audio equipment near the viewing platform, and established a small research station at the edge of the clearing. The bear, remarkably, seemed to accept these additions to her environment with stoic tolerance. She continued her nightly vigil, though she now divided her time between the viewing platform and various spots along the forest edge, always maintaining a clear line of sight to Lily's window. Dr. Mercer was fascinated by what he observed. "She's adapting her behavior," he explained to Noah one evening as they watched the bear from the porch. "Establishing a more complex territory that still allows her to fulfill whatever drive is connecting her to your daughter." "Have you ever seen anything like this before?" Noah asked. The biologist shook his head. "There are documented cases of interspecies bonding, of course. Elephants adopting orphaned antelopes, leopards caring for baby baboons, that sort of thing. But those typically involve direct physical contact and care." He gestured toward the bear, now settling onto the viewing platform for her evening watch. "This distance-based guardianship, especially between a wild predator and a human infant, it's unprecedented." As the days passed, a strange new normal established itself at the Parker cabin. The bear became an accepted part of their daily lives, a distant guardian whose presence was now more reassuring than frightening. Even Director Hargrove, who still visited occasionally to review Dr. Mercer's findings, had begun to refer to the bear by the nickname the research team had given her: Sentinel. "Sentinel's behavior patterns have remained consistent for over 2 weeks now," Dr. Mercer reported during one of their regular briefings. "She maintains her distance, shows no aggression toward humans, and responds primarily to auditory cues from the infant." What no one could fully explain, however, was the apparent two-way nature of the connection. It wasn't just that Sentinel responded to Lily's cries. Lily seemed equally attuned to the bear's presence. She would often turn toward the window when Sentinel arrived for her evening watch, babbling excitedly as if greeting an old friend. "It's almost as if they're having conversations," Grace remarked one evening as she watched Lily coo and giggle toward the window where the bear sat, watching from her platform. Dr. Mercer, who had been recording the interaction, looked up from his equipment with a thoughtful expression. "In a way, perhaps they are. Infants are remarkably receptive to nonverbal communication. They read facial expressions, body language, tones, all pre-linguistic skills that we tend to lose as we become more dependent on words." "And the bear?" Noah asked. "What is she getting from this relationship?" The biologist sighed, removing his glasses to clean them on his shirt. "That's the real mystery, isn't it? My working theory involves displaced maternal instinct, but that doesn't fully explain the specificity of her attachment to your daughter." He replaced his glasses, his expression troubled. "There's something else at work here, something we're missing." The answer came 3 days later, in the form of an unexpected discovery. Matteo, who had been conspicuously absent during much of the scientific observation period, appeared at the cabin early one morning, his weather-beaten face drawn with urgency. "I need to show you something," he told Noah, his voice low and serious. "Both of you, and Dr. Mercer too, if he's available." The tracker led them deep into the forest, following game trails that twisted through increasingly dense undergrowth. Dr. Mercer, initially skeptical of the excursion, became more interested as Matteo pointed out signs of bear activity along the way, claw marks on trees, tufts of fur caught on brambles, partially eaten berries. "She spends her days here," Matteo explained, pausing to examine a fresh print in a patch of mud. "Foraging, resting, but always circling back toward your cabin by nightfall." After nearly an hour of hiking, they reached a small, sheltered clearing. Matteo held up his hand, signaling for them to stop. "This is what I wanted you to see," he said, pointing toward a hollow beneath a fallen log. At first, Noah saw nothing unusual, just a natural depression in the earth, partially concealed by the massive trunk. Then his eyes adjusted, and he made out shapes within the hollow, fabric of some kind, arranged in a roughly circular formation. "Is that?" Grace began, her voice trailing off as recognition dawned. "A den," Matteo confirmed. "We'll find a way," Grace promised, leaning against Noah's shoulder. "For all of us." In the soft glow of the porch light they stood together, a family of 3, watched over by a guardian they had never expected, and now couldn't imagine leaving behind. The plan came together slowly, a delicate collaboration between scientific understanding and wilderness wisdom. Dr. Mercer consulted with colleagues across the country, researching cases of animal attachment and separation strategies. Matteo contributed his lifetime of tracking knowledge and intimate understanding of bear behavior. Together, they formulated an approach that might help Sentinel transition away from her vigil without trauma. "Bears are strongly driven by scent," Dr. Mercer explained during a strategy session at the Parkers' kitchen table. "That's likely part of what connects her to Lily, your daughter's distinctive baby smell. We need to gradually diminish that connection," Matteo added, while providing her with alternative stimuli that trigger her hibernation instincts. The strategy they developed was multifaceted and would unfold over several weeks. First, they would gradually reduce Sentinel's visual access to Lily by incrementally closing the nursery curtains each night. Simultaneously, they would begin leaving scented items from Lily, blankets, clothing, even used diapers, at increasingly greater distances from the cabin, creating a scent trail that would lead Sentinel deeper into the forest. "It's almost like weaning," Grace observed as Dr. Mercer outlined the plan, teaching her that she doesn't need constant contact. Noah found himself surprisingly emotional about the process. "Will she be okay? I mean, psychologically?" Dr. Mercer smiled gently at the question, one that would have seemed absurd to him weeks earlier. "Bears are remarkably resilient creatures, Mr. Parker, and we're not cutting her off completely. We're helping her transition to a more natural pattern." The final piece of the plan involved preparing a proper hibernation den for Sentinel, far enough from the cabin to break the fixation, but incorporating elements of the nest she had created. Matteo would carefully transplant some of the baby items she had collected to the new location, creating a familiar smelling refuge that might appeal to her natural instincts as winter approached. Bears typically begin hibernation preparation in late October, Dr. Mercer noted. That gives us about 3 weeks to implement the plan. They began that very night. After putting Lily to bed, Grace closed the nursery curtains halfway, leaving enough visibility for Sentinel to see inside, but creating a partial barrier. Noah, meanwhile, placed one of Lily's used blankets at the forest edge, about 10 yards beyond the viewing platform. From the living room window, they watched as Sentinel arrived for her usual vigil. She noticed the partially closed curtains immediately, rising onto her hind legs to get a better view. For a tense moment, Noah feared she might approach the cabin directly, as she had the night director Hargrove's team had arrived. Instead, the bear dropped back to all fours and began to pace, her powerful head swinging from side to side in obvious agitation. She circled the viewing platform twice before catching the scent of Lily's blanket at the forest edge. The change in her demeanor was immediate. She moved toward the blanket with purposeful strides, sniffing intently when she reached it. After a moment's investigation, she carefully picked it up in her massive jaws and carried it to the viewing platform, arranging it beneath her as she settled in to resume her watch. "That's a good sign, Doctor," Mercer said quietly from his observation post on the porch. "She's accepting the scent substitute." He made a notation in his ever-present notebook. "Tomorrow, we'll move another item a bit further into the forest." Day by day, the process continued. Each night, the nursery curtains closed a little more, and scented items were placed deeper into the forest. Sentinel's behavior shifted accordingly. She spent less time directly watching the window and more time tracking the scent trails that led away from the cabin. By the end of the first week, Mateo had located a suitable natural depression about half a mile from the cabin, a hollow beneath a rocky overhang that would make an excellent hibernation den with some modifications. Working carefully to avoid leaving his own scent, he lined the hollow with fresh pine boughs, then added 3 of the baby items from Sentinel's collection. "Now we create a path to it," he explained, returning to the cabin dusty but satisfied. "Each night we'll leave one of Lily's items closer to the new den until she finds it on her own." The strategy worked better than any of them had anticipated. By the middle of the second week, Sentinel was spending more time following the scent trails than watching the cabin. She would still appear at dusk, checking briefly on the now fully curtained nursery window, but would soon depart to track the latest scented item deeper into the forest. Dr. Mercer's cameras captured her discovery of the prepared den, her cautious approach, her thorough investigation of the hollow and its contents. To everyone's delight, she spent several hours at the site, arranging and rearranging the bedding materials, adding fallen leaves and moss from the surrounding area. "She's accepting it," the biologist reported excitedly. "This is classic pre-hibernation behavior." As October gave way to November, the forest transformed around them. Leaves fell in cascades of red and gold, morning frost silvered the grass, and a crisp stillness settled over the woods. Signs of approaching winter were everywhere. Squirrels frantically gathering the last acorns, birds flocking for southern migrations, the air sharp with the promise of snow. Sentinel's visits to the cabin grew less frequent. Some nights she didn't appear at all, though the tracking devices Mateo had placed around the forest confirmed she was regularly visiting the prepared den, adding to its insulation, preparing for her long winter sleep. "It's working," Grace said one evening, peering out at the empty viewing platform. "She's letting go." Noah felt a strange mix of relief and sorrow. "I never thought I'd miss seeing a wild bear outside our daughter's window," he admitted. "But I do." The night before Thanksgiving brought the first significant snowfall of the season. Fat, lazy flakes that began in the late afternoon and continued steadily through the evening, transforming the world into a wonderland of white. Noah built a fire in the hearth, while Grace prepared a simple meal, Lily watching the dancing flames from her playpen with wide-eyed fascination. "Do you think she's in her den now?" Grace asked as they settled at the table. "With the snow and everything?" Noah glanced toward the window, where darkness had fallen and the snow continued to swirl. Probably. Mateo said the tracking device showed she's been staying there almost constantly for the past 3 days. They had just finished eating when a sound from outside caught their attention. A soft, rumbling call they both recognized instantly. Noah moved quickly to the window, peering out into the snowy night. There, illuminated by the porch light and dusted with a coating of fresh snow, stood Sentinel. She had returned to the viewing platform one last time, her massive form seeming almost ghostly against the white landscape. "Grace," Noah called softly. "She's back." Grace joined him at the window, Lily in her arms. The baby, who had been starting to drift off to sleep, perked up at the sound of Sentinel's call. She twisted in her mother's grasp, eyes searching until they found the bear's dark shape outside. To their amazement, Lily raised one tiny hand in what almost seemed like a wave, then made a soft cooing sound remarkably similar to Sentinel's rumble. The bear rose onto her hind legs, head tilted as if listening intently. Snow gathered on her fur, transforming her into a creature of myth, half bear, half winter spirit. She made her distinctive sound once more, then slowly, deliberately, dropped back to all fours and turned away from the cabin. They watched in silence as she padded across the snowy clearing toward the forest edge. At the tree line, she paused, looking back toward the cabin one final time. Then, with a shake that sent snow cascading from her fur, she disappeared into the darkness of the pines. "Goodbye," Grace whispered, pressing her fingers to the cold glass. "Sleep well." In her arms, Lily made that strange cooing sound again, then laid her head against her mother's shoulder with a contented sigh. Noah slipped his arm around them both, feeling a profound sense of completion. "She'll be back in the spring," he said, though he wasn't entirely certain. "Bears don't hibernate forever." "No," Grace agreed softly, "but things will be different then. Lily will be older, walking, maybe even talking by then." The thought hung between them, the inevitable passage of time, the changes it would bring. By spring, their tiny, vulnerable infant would be well on her way to becoming a toddler. The primal connection between baby and bear might naturally fade as Lily grew, her cries changing, her scent evolving. Yet something told Noah this wasn't truly an ending. Just as Sentinel's maternal instinct had persisted through years of loss, creating this unlikely bond, so too might some thread of connection remain. Transformed, perhaps, but not entirely broken. "Come on," he said gently, guiding his family away from the window. "It's time for Lily's bedtime story." As they settled into the nursery rocker, Lily already heavy-lidded with approaching sleep, Noah found himself telling a new tale, one about a mother bear who watched over a human baby through the long autumn nights, keeping her safe with love that transcended the boundaries between their worlds. Outside, the snow continued to fall, soft and steady, covering the viewing platform where a wild guardian had once kept watch. Below the forest canopy, in a den lined with pine and the faint scents of a human child, Sentinel curled into herself, her breathing slowing as hibernation took hold. And in the warm nursery of the cabin at the forest's edge, a child drifted to sleep beneath the watchful eyes of her human parents, her dreams filled with gentle rumbling sounds and the comforting presence of a guardian she would never quite forget.